Patriotic Canadians know that Canada is in a bad way, that we have crisis after crisis, issue after issue, problem after problem. So you would think that the American businessman and WEF board member who desperately wanted to be Prime Minister of Canada would worry and target those problems. What was his first step to do? Was it tackle housing crisis? Was it worry about the oncoming tariff situation with the Americans? Was it to rebuild the economy? Nope, he went off to France and England. Welcome to the Canadian Shield. My name is Sterling. I'm your host. Carney says that he went off to France to strengthen the ties between Canada and France. But I mean, Justin Trudeau went to France all the time. He was always in hugging Macron. I don't know that the King of England planting a tree in the Buckingham Palace garden is going to change anything as it pertains to the situation with the United States. But I do realize that Mark Carney has a citizenship with Ireland and has a citizenship with Great Britain. And perhaps that's why he feels such an affinity to Europe, that maybe he is actually in his heart European and not North American at all. And so, Mr. Climate, I'm going to tackle the climate and I'm going to worry about this. Flew a jet to France, and then from France to England, and then from England he went to the northern part of Canada. And then from the northern part of Canada, he went down to Toronto. And then I suppose eventually he'll make his way back to Ottawa. Maybe, I don't know, because he's not a member of parliament. So what difference would Ottawa make to him? Perhaps he just did it for the jet. Maybe he just feels like if Canada's paying for his fuel, if the taxpayer is putting all the money into the food and the supplies and the tour, it's like not just one jet ride. Like, because don't think that that caravan of SUVs that he travels in goes on the same plane as he does. That's a carrier plane, right? That's a cargo plane. They would park them. You know, you've seen it a lot of times in images. So that's 2 or 3 jets making their way over to France and then to England and then back to Canada. Did he talk to Donald Trump about the situation? Like he was talking, I'm a big tough toughie and Trump is going to be Mr. Tough Tough. Nope. Rather than go to Europe, which to me makes no sense, but I'm sure he had his ulterior motives. He went and he told Macron in an announcement that Canada is more European, is the most European non-European country, which is a bit weird when you consider the amount of people that live in Canada that are not European, and when you consider the amount of that, there's absolutely nothing in the way of Canada that resembles Europe beyond King Charles being on our money and on our stamps. We are, of course, our own nation, not a European nation. We're not part of the EU. We are Canada. So you would think that Mark Carney, who has already been very sharp and very testy with the press, who won't speak to the independent press, who is completely ignoring a large section and segment of this country, would go and make amends with Alberta and Saskatchewan. Nope. Not even close. Didn't even come up in conversation. When asked about why he doesn't have anyone representing Alberta and Saskatchewan in his cabinet, he said that he was born there. And so he's representing Alberta, which is strange because doesn't seem to have a very strong relationship with the petrochemicals that come out of Alberta with any of the businesses that he keeps mentioning. Going after the petrochemicals and not protecting Saskatchewan's natural resources, you would think that he would at least pick somebody from the West to look after that region, that area. But instead, he has chosen one of his yes men from Nova Scotia, Cody Bloy. He is the Minister of Agriculture and Agri-Food and Rural Economic Development because they have an enormous amount of agriculture growing in Nova Scotia. I mean, I guess they got a lot of blueberries, right? They got a lot of apples. But when you consider the amount of agriculture that starts in Manitoba and finishes in British Columbia, you would think that there would probably be somebody who understands what they're up against in that respect. But he has to pick one of his yes men. The cabinet is just yes men and people who are desperate to cling to their jobs, who don't really care what half of them threatened to resign. They said half of them are not going to rerun, and then there they are standing there like a bunch of fools who said one thing and did another. Is that the kind of parliament that we want? Is that the kind of government that we want, who will just say one thing, do another, and not have any account or not hold themselves to any accountability for the words that have come out of their mouth? Just like Carney, who said that he was going to worry about the economic issue, and the very first chance he got, he took a shower and flew to Europe. Now, Carney's been very active on X I'm sure he's hired or he's probably got Canada to hire an entire media team because he's trying very hard to put out these polished tweets. However, the media team doesn't understand anything. They're probably filled with people who have never been in an argument in their life. They probably are filled with people who have never been in a fight in their life. And Mark Carney can't even handle a pushback from his own press. He can't even handle somebody that has the press credentials to ask him a question. He snaps at them. So you can imagine what is going to happen when he comes up against somebody like Putin or Trump or Danielle Smith, who's going to push back on him. He's going to lose his mind. He's just not going to be able to handle it. He's not capable because he has no skill set in that. But I'll get into that, and I'm sure that will come to the light. This tweet, though, I want to talk about because he's talking about how he's going to send, we're standing behind Ukraine no matter what. Even though we got an army of 15 guys with slingshots, somehow he thinks that we should be dumping more money into Ukraine. We've spent billions of dollars that we don't have. But in his mind, we're going to be sending more money. I spoke with Prime Minister Stammer and President Zelensky and many of our closest allies this morning to discuss Ukraine's path to peace. The Americans set up a thing in Saudi Arabia. Did you talk to the Americans? No, you didn't, because they don't want to talk to you. Canada supports the proposal of an immediate ceasefire in Ukraine, which is what Trump wants. Now Russia must stop stalling and launching its attacks. It's time for Russia to come to the table in good faith. As the G7 agreed at Charleroi, we will tighten the monitoring of sanctions to encourage compliance. Canada is Ukraine's steadfast ally. We will make sure Ukraine has the military support it needs to defend itself now and into the future. We don't even have the military to defend Canada into the future, so I don't know what you're talking about. Stop talking like that. As for this, it's time for Russia to stop stalling and come to the table in good faith. This is the talk of a kid in grade 4 who has absolutely no idea how the world works. This is the words of somebody who thinks in their mind that there's this, counter and balance and all of that. No, when you offer a ceasefire, the first thing they do, the countries or combatants do when they are offered a ceasefire is to amp it up because they want to know that wherever those lines are, they want to be able to come to the table with a strong position so that they can say, no, we're keeping Donbass, or we're keeping the Crimean, or whatever, any of the locations. Or Ukraine says, no, we want one of it back because we have the upper hand currently. And that's how negotiation works. Not this little, we're all sitting around the boardroom talking about what's going to follow, what certain regulation and all the rest of it. This guy's not capable, and he's certainly not competent enough to. A person who has no ability to fight, it doesn't know what a scrap looks like, doesn't understand the impact that it has. I mean, we got Zelensky pulling people out of their trucks, young men, pulling them right out of their homes to send them off to the front lines to fight. He won't let any of the men leave the country, and he wants Europe to round up all the men that might have got out of the country and send them back. This is an ally. This is not the kind of things that Canadians support. I've never in my life considered that to be something as a Canadian trait, that we would force somebody to fight against their will. That makes very little sense to me. And yet here we have our prime minister over there saying, no, we support that action. We support that behavior. That's a bit weird. You don't support oil and gas, but you support people being dragged out of their trucks or out of their homes or being ripped out of the arms of their wives and children and sent to the front line against their will. Nowhere in there, though, did you talk to the United States, who are the only people that are making any progress, who are the real people that Zelensky, the reason that Zelensky offered this ceasefire in Ukraine. You'll remember last month when he sat in the Oval Office and said he will never talk to Putin. And then Trump said, okay, well, we're not giving you another nickel. And then he said, oh, Putin, can I speak with you, please? So what Putin decides to do now is all about statesmanship. You wouldn't understand that because you're not a statesman. As for we're going to watch the sanctions, you can't control the sanctions now. So I don't know where you think in your mind you're going to somehow all of a sudden increase the sanctions. This is ridiculous and it's embarrassing, and he shouldn't be talking this way. But I'll show you something that's really interesting, and it might be one of the reasons why he's afraid to talk to Donald Trump, scared to talk to Donald Trump. Carney's GFANZ, that's a mouthful, is under U.S. jurisdictional review as of December 2024. Now, it's here. The GFANZ is the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero. Those words are starting to become like they give me a cringe net zero. And you can see that this is the House representative of the Judiciary Committee. These are important people. These are senators and congressmen or whatever who are pulling together a report on the behavior of Mark Carney's business, this GFANZ. Now, most of the banking industries that were originally in GFANZ have pulled out. So this is almost falling to pieces, but they have proof that his idea was to replace people on the board who wouldn't agree with his no carbon. So it seems to me that we're looking at more and more of an ideological divide with what Trump and has designed for the economy, right? And Trump's following the economy of most of the world. They don't worry about the carbon tax in China, India, all these other places where people are trying to, improve the standards of living. Only in Mark Carney's mind is this some sort of, revolutionary thing sweeping the earth. In fact, it's the other way around. People have realized after 10, 15, 20 years of this nightmare that it doesn't work and we have to find a better pathway forward. But Mark Carney is clinging desperately to these antiquated notions, these proven to be ineffective ideas. And now it looks like he's going to be called before the Senate committee. How's that going to play out? And to be answered questions on his insistence that if the company doesn't do what he says, he's going to somehow perform espionage on that company, whether it be to do a mass campaign against them or to try to replace the board, which would mean buying the stock and then voting them out. And then that's just a step. There's ways you can do that, but it is not permitted. It is a very underhanded thing. And they made sure that it couldn't happen 50 years ago so that people would have faith in the stock market. I don't want to bore you with that. I'm sure there'll be plenty of time for Mark Carney to trip and fall on his own face. His lack of understanding of the economy seems to be coming more and more to the fore. It seems while he was in Europe, he could phone the EU President von Leyen. He couldn't call the guy from France or call the guy from England instead of driving his plane all over half the world. But I guess he could phone over to Brussels and speak to this woman, Ursula von der Leyen, who's the president of the European Union, which is teetering on the brink of not only economic collapse, but many of the countries that are involved in it are no longer respecting the things that they want, primarily because lots of them have to buy their oil from Russia. You can't even make up the lack of cohesion in the far left's attempt to make this world work smoothly. It seems the opposite. It seems like they want to introduce is chaos. Here's the tweet. I had an excellent call with President von der Leyen about the road ahead for the Canada-EU trade. Canada-EU trade. You want? Come on, man. Everybody knows that the EU doesn't have trade with the outside world, and what they do have all comes out of China. Canada and Europe are strong, reliable partners in a shifting global economy that matters more than ever. We're ready to secure new transatlantic business opportunities together. So instead of worrying about having, British Columbia trade with Nova Scotia, Newfoundland trade with Quebec, and Quebec, who won't trade with anyway, trade with the Yukon and Ontario, allowing other people to trade with them because Ontario has all the people and they're the ones going to be spending the money, to allow Saskatchewan to sell its pierogies outside of the West. I mean, there's all kinds of things that could be happening inside of the economy of Canada, but your decision is to fly off to Europe and talk with your WEF buddies. As pointed out by this person, Bradshaw, your WEF buddy, whatever you have planned for Canada, we will not listen. So there's a person who's a patriot and doesn't agree with the things that Mark Carney is trying to push onto Canada. This is an interesting one from Ryan Gerdison. Canada's trade with Europe is 53 billion euros, and Canada's trade with the US is 7 to 8 times larger than that. So we would be trading 34 billion USD with Europe, and we're trading 349 billion USD with the United States. And this guy thinks that somehow we're going to find all of the things that we require on a ship. This is Mr. Low Carbon, right? He now wants you to start putting stuff on ships that they're going to manufacture it. Now, European Union is already worrying about having this carbon everywhere, right? It's all carbon, 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 right? Because it allows for a very few select companies to work, and then the government can control that, just like they did in 1930s Germany. It's a Marxist ideology. I will explain it in a different video. I just want to point out how in this one he's trying to convince you that somehow doing trade with Europe is more important than Ottawa fixing the relationship with Alberta, or telling Quebec that by destroying Canada, they threaten our sovereignty, or by telling China that they got to back off the tariffs or we're not going to be doing business with China. No, he's not doing any of that. He doesn't seem to be worried about the fire in the backyard. He seems to just want to go over to the barbecue across the street, where everybody is nice to him, nobody talks back to him, no pushback. I mean, this is a guy who won't even he won't respect any of the independent media. There's nothing different, is the point that I'm trying to make here. This is just the same thing. It's just Trudeau 2.0. It's just the exact same ideology. It's the exact same treatment of people who don't agree with them. You either have to fall in line and say yes sir, yes sir, yes sir, or there's no place for you, which means that he won't talk to Alberta. He won't talk to Saskatchewan. He won't talk to anybody that doesn't agree with him 100%. I mean, Doug Ford is bending over backwards, but I don't understand. I think Doug Ford just doesn't understand what he's doing. And the people around him are probably telling him something that is bad advice. He has no problem. He made another tweet about talking to the Premier of Quebec. Well, I just feel like the Premier of Quebec has a great opportunity to separate. See you later. We can use the $13 billion that came out of Alberta to build a better pathway down to Nova Scotia. I mean, this guy is soft. He's manipulating us into thinking that he wants to do something about the carbon tax, but really he just put a little bit of he just rolled it back, and he could just as easily roll it up with the stroke of a pen. He didn't destroy the legislation. He is trying for now to put a shadow carbon tax. He wants to send all of our money over to Zelensky, where we don't even know where that money goes. Ironically, so that Zelensky can take whatever money, half of that money, and buy stuff from the Americans. And then, I guess Zelensky's got 2 or 3 houses now. He's got one in the Riviera. He's got one in Europe, like in France. So maybe that's where that money's coming from, because his economy is trash. So I don't know where he's getting that money, if not from the handouts of the rest of the world. And how many of those other dollars are finding their way through? I don't know. I'll have to cover that later. But I just want to show you that Carney is talking foolishness while Canada is suffering. I mean, how long are we going to have to wait for a government that can pull us out of this tailspin that we're in? How long are we going to have to put up with people trying to pretend with virtue signaling that they care what happens to us, all the while food prices shoot through the roof, the portions that you're buying for that money, so you're paying more but you're getting less? I mean, the list of problems that Canada is facing right now means that this guy shouldn't have left the country for a year instead of a day. He waited 1 day, took right off. He could have phoned Macron. Oh, yeah, thanks. He could have Zoomed. He could have done all kinds of stuff. But he elects to fly his, Canada's private plane over there with his two planes in tow, all the security that goes along with him, all the while telling Canadians, don't worry about it. All of our problems are going to be solved because we're going to open a new trade thing with France, one of the most nationalist countries in Europe. You know how hard it is to sell something that's not made in France? In France? It's a clown show. I think we can see that Mark Carney is just more of the same, that he's just, Trudeau 2.0, or perhaps Trudeau was Carney 2.0. I don't believe that there will be any difference. They don't seem to be caring. Neither of them cared about what was happening to the Canadian population. Carney has done nothing about moving forward on an election date. He laughs and jokes and somehow thinks that it's funny that he's, sometime before November. Like, this is not a joke, bud. Canadians are in a bad way. And you would understand that if you, for 1 second, took a look around you instead of thinking that everybody in your little echo chamber is living the life that you feel that all Canadians are living. You don't understand any of the problems that Canadians are facing. You don't understand how having no money at the end of the day because you had to spend all of your money on rent, meaning that you had to choose between paying the bills and buying groceries, that you had to run your credit card, that the state of the Canadian household is over 100% in debt. And all you want to do is fly around Europe and act like somehow that's going to solve the problem, the trade issues that we have with the United States of America. It's not going to solve the trade issues that we have, and you need to be looking at the problem from a completely different way, from a totally different standpoint. But of course, you can't because of your very narrow focus on the carbon tax, and you don't care what the carbon tax is doing to the economy of Canada. You don't care what the carbon tax has done to the people. You say, oh, the carbon tax is divisive. It's not divisive. It's dysfunctional. The reason that the carbon tax bothers people is not because of anything that Pierre Poilievre said. The reason that it bothers people is because they don't have any money. That the carbon tax that you force everybody to pay, that you force them to pay through making businesses pay it, is only destroying our spending power. By limiting the amount of buildings, the houses that can be built, you are destroying the ability for people to negotiate better prices. Gallivanting around Europe on day one so that you can walk around on everybody's shoulders and say to your Italian friends, oh, look, I'm a prime minister too. It's a joke. This is a problem. There are millions of people at stake. And you don't seem to care at all. All you seem to want to care about is just more virtue signal, just more what theater, what it will look like. Fancy words and platitudes, no action at all. And that, I think we've had enough of. That's 10 years now. And anybody who thinks that they're going to waste their vote on you and it's going to change, that anything new or anything different is going to come based on the very few actions that we've seen thus far, must really be deep in the Kool-Aid. Because we as Canadians deserve to live a better life. We deserve to live a life where rent is very inexpensive. We deserve it so that at the end of the day, a person making minimum wage can afford to live in a nice house with safe streets, where there's not crime running rampant everywhere, where criminals are put in prison no matter where they're from, no matter what the far left tries to tell you that they didn't get all the chances in life. Anyway, I'll get into that in another video. I'm going to wrap here. I want to thank you for listening. I'll talk to you next time.